Thanks so much, Michael. It's fun to be here. It's very cool to connect with you. So when I started graduate school back in 1999, I kind of went in knowing, okay, I want to study emotions. I found emotions really fascinating. There's sort of these internal psychological and biological forces, which that alone makes them really exciting. But they're what motivate us to do pretty much everything that we do, right? We need emotions to do kind of anything. And so I started studying emotions, and emotions were a big topic of research study in psychology at the time. But the emotions that most psychologists were studying in the early 2000s and the 90s were kind of a narrow group of emotions. They were called the basic emotions, things like fear, sadness, anger, happiness. And they were emotions that were thought to be universal across our species, shared with other animals, and likely to be evolved. And because they were partly biological, these emotions were considered important and worthy of study and grant money and all that sort of thing. Whereas other emotions that people thought were a little too complex, a little too involving the self and various cultural processes, those emotions, people weren't so sure if they were biological or part of human nature. And so they kind of got left behind. And pride was one of those emotions that got left behind. It's what we call a self-conscious emotion, which means that to feel pride, we have to think about how we feel about ourselves. And for a long time, scholars didn't think that self-conscious emotions were part of human nature, but there was no basis for that. And so the first thing kind of I decided to do in my research is to figure out if that's true. Is it possible that pride is a universal part of human nature? Might pride be part of our species' evolutionary history and evolutionary heritage? And so that's sort of how I got into studying it.
Okay, and what are some of the areas of pride that when you're talking about studying it, you tend to focus on? What becomes a layer deeper than that as
Yeah,
far as
sure. So
tangibly?
yeah, absolutely. Well, so at the time that I began this research, and this is still the case today, the sort of gold standard for knowing whether an emotion is universal is to know whether it has a distinct nonverbal display. Typically, this means a facial expression that people all over the world recognize the same way, identify the same way, and show the same way when they're feeling that emotion. And we knew that was the case prior to me doing my research for about 5 or 6 emotions, mainly the ones I said before. That's thanks to the work of Paul Ekman, who's sort of the world's most famous emotion researcher, or has been historically. And so I sort of started out by seeing, is that the case for pride? And so we took photos of people posing expressions that we thought might look like pride. Turns out the pride expression has facial components. So there's a slight smile, but involves more than the face. People tilt their head up a little bit. They expand their posture in this sort of blatant way, or they, move their arms out from their body in one way or another. But when we had people pose this expression, we found that observers reliably recognized it as pride. People everywhere, 80 to 90% of people that we would show the photo to would say, yeah, that's pride, and not some other related emotion like excitement or happiness or, a bunch of related emotions. We then took this work across cultures. We found that it generalized to people, all over sort of the Western world. And then we did some research in Africa, in Burkina Faso, which is in West Africa. We were fortunate to have access to a small community of people living in sort of this small scale traditional society, people who would be described as pretty cut off from the Western world. They lived in mud huts. They had no electricity, no plumbing, certainly no internet. This was 2003, so there wasn't much internet in Burkina Faso in general at that point. And the thinking here is, if these people identify the pride expression in the same way that, our Western university students do, then we have to conclude it's probably universal, because it's unlikely that these individuals in Burkina Faso would have ever seen a pride expression in a movie or a television show or a magazine, because they don't have access to those things from America or anywhere else in the Western world. And in fact, that's what we found, right? So they recognize pride expressions at the same rate that they recognized other emotion expressions, which is pretty high for people who are, totally cut off from the Western world, have never participated in research before, and so on. And so that was kind of the first piece of evidence that what we're dealing with here is something that is universal. We then went on to see, do people universally show pride? And so I was fortunate, this one, you might think, well, it's hard because you have to actually get people in the moment of pride and take their photo. But on the other hand, we see it all the time. And as I'm sure everyone knows, there are lots of contexts televised regularly where people show pride, like sporting events. And I had a collaborator who was a judo coach and worked with some of the leaders in the judo community. And so we obtained photographs of athletes in the 2004 Olympic Games competing in the judo competition. And we had photos sort of taken from the moment of match completion, repeatedly. So it was almost like a little video sequence, essentially. And we look at the behaviors shown by winners compared to losers. And the winners showed all of the behaviors that are part of the pride expression. So expanded posture, they made themselves take up space, their arms are spread out from their body, their head is tilted up, they're smiling. And we see this for athletes all over the world. We did analyses, sort of culture specific analyses targeting different parts of the world. Doesn't matter, no matter where we looked, we see the same display. We see it across gender. And then the last thing we did on this note, which I think is kind of a really cool test of whether this is sort of an innate part of human nature, is we looked at blind athletes. So there's the Paralympics, which is athletes of different sort of abilities and so on. And there's a Paralympic blind judo competition, athletes who are unsighted. And we were able to obtain data for a small portion of those athletes who we were able to find were congenitally blind. So they've never been able to see. And that's really important if we want to look at people who just simply could not ever have learned to show pride by watching others, right? These are individuals who've never seen others. And when we look at just those individuals, we see the same thing. They too show the components of the pride expression in response to winning a match compared to losing. And so I think that's some of the best evidence there is that this is sort of an innate biological response to success. It's what people do automatically. They kind of can't help but do it when they feel proud.
So yes, I've never thought about it in that context of the visual expressions, but all of us know what it looks like when we are watching a game and we see the difference between the facial expressions of the players, pre-game and post-game. There's a very different experience of that grin on the face of the NFL team that's won the Super Bowl. And all the layers that go down, beneath it. But I've never thought of it, in the context of the physical sort of, manifestation display. So in your world, you see from the book, types of pride, hubris versus authentic. Yes. Speak a little bit about, what the deltas are between those two.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was sort of the next thing that we wanted to do, having found that, okay, this is an emotion that's important. We see it in humans everywhere. It seems like it's part of human nature. Let's figure out what it is. We know that it's the emotion people feel when they've had a success. But what we quickly found is that that's not all it is. It is this thing that propels achievement and innovation and moral behavior. But what we found is when people think about pride, they sort of think about two different things. On the one hand, people think about this achievement-oriented sense of confidence and self-worth. But on the other hand, people think about arrogance or egotism. And if you ask someone, what is pride? The answer you get is really, likely going to involve both those things. Which thing comes first depends on where they're from. Many Americans will first say achievement. And then if you say, oh, but is there a dark side to pride or is there arrogance? They'll say, oh yeah, that's pride too. People in Asian countries, the first thing they tend to think of is the dark side, right? They'll be like, oh, it's not good to be pride, it's too arrogant. And then if you say, well, what about achievement? They might sort of acknowledge, oh yes, there's also that part of pride. And what we found is that, in fact, pride is two very different things. In English, we use the same word, pride, to refer to them. But other countries actually, or other languages, have two different words. One to represent this achievement-oriented pride, which we've coined authentic pride. And then the other to represent this sort of arrogant pride, which we call hubristic pride. And what we found is that while authentic pride is associated with all kinds of positive outcomes in terms of success, but also positive social relationships, sort of adaptive romantic relationships, positive personality traits like extroversion and confidence and conscientiousness, hardworking, a motivation toward achievement. Hubristic pride is associated with sort of a lot of psychological dysfunction. So people who tend to feel hubristic pride are more likely to be anxious and depressed. They're more likely to have problematic relationships. They tend to be narcissistic. They might be Machiavellian and aggressive, taking advantage of others. We have a paper showing that people who feel a lot of hubristic pride are willing to cheat or lie if doing so will get them status. So they're very status oriented. They really want to get high status, which is the case for authentic pride as well. But people who feel authentic pride don't engage or are less likely to engage in sort of antisocial or immoral behaviors, unethical behaviors in order to achieve. They want to achieve by working really hard. Whereas people who feel hubristic pride, it really kind of becomes more about the way that others look at them and sort of basking in the glow of others' praise and having that sense that others see them as this person who's really great. That becomes more important than actually being really great. And so you get a range of kind of problematic social behaviors as a result.
Right, like too much pride becomes bad, and not enough pride is, well, no, we can say not enough pride. Modest pride is positive.
Yeah. So we actually find, it's not about the amount of pride that actually, you can have a lot of authentic pride and it's not bad. People who feel lots of authentic pride show all kinds of positive outcomes. It's really sort of a qualitative difference, not a quantitative difference. So it's two different kinds of pride, two different ways of feeling pride. And that's really the key distinction here that we found.
So, to the audience and generally, I like the study of etymology and history of words, and in the context of some of those descriptions, one can consider oppose, or you may respond. So how did pride get associated with one of the 7 deadly sins? And how did pride also get associated in a more contemporary context to the LGBT community and some of the themes associated with that? Whereas culturally, I don't relate to either of those. I just go, people should be proud of the things they do, because it's almost a gift that is a return for the toil that's self-generated. For if we contextualize the totality of the materiality that we work to accumulate, as we all accumulate those things, the excitement of getting to the thing is a source of pride. The actual having the thing is fairly disappointing. And as we get older, we eventually get to the point in all of our lives, which we'll all get there, which is ain't taking it to the grave, pass it on. But the toils for which we labored throughout our lives and the things that we did to get there, to produce the material, is the source of pride, not the things ourselves that we own. Anyway, so I don't know if you want to react to any of messages, but I do love this thing called pride that we're talking about, for it's so dimensional.
Yeah, no, I absolutely, I 100% agree with what you just said, which is that pride is a good thing. It is the thing that motivates us to work hard, to innovate, to create, to do all the things that really make us human, that sort of are the things that we're most, I hate to say proud of, but the things that as a culture, as a species, we feel best about, that, we have come to the place that we are as a species on this planet because of pride, right? Pride is, I believe, the thing that motivates people to not just sort of accept, oh, we're just getting by, we're surviving, we have enough, we don't need to go beyond what we have. There's emotions that motivate that, survival emotions, fear, anger, happiness. Pride goes beyond that. It's not just about surviving. It's about feeling like, wow, I'm the kind of person that others look up to. I'm a kind of person that I can feel good about. And so essentially, by having this emotion in humans that makes us want to build an identity that we feel good about, evolution has ensured that we are motivated to do things that we need to do to get high status, to maintain a particular status in our group. And that in turn is associated with adaptive fitness. People who are higher status tend to survive longer and reproduce more. And so there are real adaptive benefits to it. But separate from that, there's all kinds of benefits culturally, right? We've created all the things we've created because we as individuals and as groups want to be looked up to. We want to feel good about ourselves. And then that in turn has others feel good about us and look up to us. It is interesting though, that you're absolutely right. In ancient history and today, religions have always looked down on pride. They've always called it sinful. The Bible says this, but every religion, Buddhism says the same thing. The Dalai Lama has talked about pride as a negative force. And that's actually part of why I wanted to write this book, was to say, that's not the whole story. I think the pride that religions talk about when they talk about it as sinful is hubristic pride, right? There are negative consequences to hubristic pride. Interestingly, we found that hubristic pride also promotes high status and social rank. So there's a reason humans feel it. It is functional from an adaptive perspective, but from a psychological perspective and from a social perspective, it can be dysfunctional. It can lead to real problems in relationships. It can lead people to not have friends. It can lead to psychological dysfunctioning. So I wouldn't tell anyone to try to have hubristic pride. What I would tell people is the pride that is considered sinful is not just pride. It is a specific form of pride. And you can choose to feel pride and not feel hubristic pride. You can go for authentic pride and reap the benefits that come with that, from achievement to happiness, to good relationships, to getting others respect, to wisdom. All kinds of things come with pride, I believe, but it's authentic pride. And so I think the key thing here is knowing the difference, understanding that distinction, and understanding that the pride that religious scholars have always warned against is a specific kind of pride.
All right, now I'll juxtapose another interesting spin on that. Two periods of history and two significant cultures in modern time. Post-World War I Germany.
Okay.
How would one describe the cumulative level of pride experienced by the population and the corresponding potential impact that may have in the decades immediately following, as our armchair historians' luxury gets to do, is look backwards? And then to juxtapose the pride post-1942, after a surprise attack on a country's naval bases in the middle of the Pacific, and what it did, and the period thereafter that followed. So
that's interesting.
Was pride there? And I don't know. It looked anyway. So
yeah. No, absolutely. I think that's a great point. So, and I really think that the two prides that I've talked about, that I've studied, absolutely apply. And there's some research suggesting this is the case at what we would call the collective level. So the neat thing about pride, and really all self-conscious emotions, in addition to pride, their self-conscious emotions are guilt, shame, embarrassment, humiliation, perhaps, emotions that are all about the self. And the thing about the self is we can think about the self at what we call the personal self level, which is me as an individual, but we can also think about the self at this collective group level, right? And so we as humans are able to think about our identity in terms of who we are separate from others, but also who we are as part of a larger group. And that becomes part of our identity. I think the easiest way to see this is to go to any professional sports game, and you see people wearing the jerseys of the team that they belong, that their hometown team, rooting for them. And really kind of the emotional outbursts and the emotion expression and feelings they experience watching that team win or lose suggests that they don't see that team as separate from themselves, right? That team is part of their own identity, and that's collective identity, right? I mean, here, I live in Vancouver. People are really into the Vancouver Canucks, the local hockey team. And when they're doing well or have games, you see people all over the city dressed all day, all the time in these Canucks jerseys. You go to the games and people, I want to say they take it personally, whether it's a win or loss. But the truth is that's because they experience it not as a win or loss for that team, but as a win or loss for them. And by them, I mean the group version of them. And so the same thing happens at the country level, right? People come to feel a sense of connection or identity with the country they belong to. And leaders of countries can instill this in various ways. And so, my understanding of what happened as Nazi Germany or was becoming a thing after World War I, is that you had a sense of hubristic collective pride being built. And another way to think about that is nationalism. And this is sort of the distinction between nationalism and patriotism. I think that distinction maps on really nicely to the distinction between authentic pride and hubristic pride, but at the country level. And so here we have Hitler and the Nazis building a sense of nationalistic hubristic pride, where it's all about not just how great Germany is as a country in terms of what it's done and what it's doing for its people, but how great Germans are and how superior they are to other humans everywhere else, right? Superiority that's not authentic pride. Anytime anyone's talking about superiority, it's hubristic pride. The other thing about hubristic pride is it's more focused on stable traits, so sort of abilities rather than effort. So this is who you are, no matter what you do. It doesn't matter that you have these innate kind of traits. And that was kind of a key idea behind Nazi Germany, that the Aryan race was this sort of stably superior race, so to speak, and that no matter what effort they put in or other people put in, that's not really what matters.
And
so
to juxtapose, because this is actually where I was thinking, but your comment and observation is even a more interesting dimension of the country pride, and that is the complete loss of pride that followed the loss and collapse of World War I.
Sure.
That the rest of the world seemed to treat them and their economy and systems and government and leadership as just so bad. So the juxtaposition of then what the next, leaders that came into the country did was, I'm going to turn the country's pride totally around from despair and the depression and all of that, etc.
No, and I think that, I mean, it's interesting you say that, because actually hubristic pride, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that hubristic pride comes out of insecurity, that it is a sort of defensive, inflated, grandiose form of pride that people experience as a way of avoiding experiencing shame. And it is a response to shame that people don't want to deal with. So rather than think, oh my God, I'm not good enough, I feel bad about myself, we suppress that. And instead we sort of build up this excessive, grandiose sense of self that hubristic pride is all about. So I think that completely makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, so the commentary to to not get distracted by those that are not interested in that period of history, for I could go on, is that post World War II, I think if we look back at the achievements of the business, the achievements of of America and what America stood for, and its blossoming of becoming the world power, and a world power that had great intentions, and its influence on the creation of the United Nations and everything that stood for, and then the construction of everything and the building up in the middle class. We see that as a period. I hope that's a shared view. We would assume that America was experiencing a great level of pride in front of the world for what it had achieved in an amazingly short period of time and all the greatness, and then it continued on, right? Okay, so now it's 2023. So in the context now of cultural, societal, country level pride, where's our pride now? Is our pride, it's in the middle, it's somewhere a little bit below, but not much different? I don't know. It's a question.
I mean, my sense is that America is really divided right now in terms of what people feel, in terms of how people feel about the country, right? I mean, you see this in terms of politics being so polarized. And so I think that if you ask people from a quote unquote red state what their pride in their country is, and you ask people in a blue state what their pride in their country is, you might get really different answers. I think there's a general sense that democracy is sort of this core value that underlies the founding of America and what makes it different from many other countries. And that's certainly a source of pride, I think, for maybe Americans everywhere. But then how that plays out and what it means and how you talk about it and how you think about it is really going to vary based on, I would think, where you live,
So, all right. So I appreciate everybody's patience as we walk through, the construct of pride, its different manifestations, some of the story and experience that we've had as to a company called WorkProud around the idea of pride emanates from some experience with some real world clients and some great researchers, Dr. Nelson and Dr. Garlick, we've been building these reward programs for employee populations. So we're bringing it now from the country level, above the individual, but larger than the team, into the company. Right, so the company view of the world as a sort of entity. And the companies would have us build sort of programs around some rewards and recognition, and those matured and evolved over the sort of first part of the 2010s and so forth to storytelling. And we watched as the technology partners to our important clients, thanks to all of you, if any of you are on the call, for your support, and saw these storytelling and recognition sort of activities that have different words for it. And we came to this point and pivot that said, what's it all for? Why are they doing these things? Partly, why is the client doing these things? But more from the question of, why are they doing these things? To what end and what impact are you having on either the individual or the organization in totality, beyond ticking the box to say, hey, we did this thing because someone told us to do it, so we did it, and there it is, right? Beyond that, why are they doing it? And we started honing in on this question, or this emotion of pride. That's why they're doing this. That's why they're telling stories about each other. That's why they're liking the stories told about them. That's why they're liking the stories about themselves. Then we started sort of looking at that more holistically and looking at the general population, at least the general population in the United States, saying, well, there's all this social media stuff. And the social media people are telling stories too. I mean, they're telling stories. That's what they're doing. Most of the stories seem to be a lot about themselves. Sometimes it's about others, depending upon which kind of social media things you're interacting with. And what's behind that is this, well, they like the interactivity. They like being seen. They like others interacting with those stories. Oh, we said to ourselves, this is such an interesting observation. And we started honing deeper, and it came to this sort of pride thing. But our idea of pride was neither hubristic nor authentic. It was actually a question of, it's fundamentally important, for we grew up, all of us programmed in the school systems that we attended, where getting a gold star meant a lot, right? And we were really happy when we got that gold star. So we were already being trained to say, you should celebrate your own achievements and accomplishments. It was really great for us to all get a 9 out of 10 on our scores as we went through school. And then as we got older, that the essays would get A's and so forth like that. They were great, but shit, nothing was as good as bringing it home to mum and dad, right? And sharing the others, and the gold star and the emotion we received in response to that, to go, I matter, I'm important, I've done something, and somebody else saw it. So began this sort of, journey and venture. And some of you who have attended some of these other calls might appreciate, some of the research that we've done. But we saw pride as being two things, right? Or two sources. And again, is it the same pride that you're using? Maybe not the same, but related, or part of it, or dimensionally different, because we don't have the right, maybe linguistics for it. And that was, there's the individual pride, which is the emotional experience we have as a result of doing something ourselves that's good, self-propelled, really intrinsic, okay? We know we can do well, so we want to give the best. And we ran the track, we finished the product, we wrote the essay, we delivered the email, we achieved the sales result, we wrote the line of code, we built the thing, we kept the production going, we saved the life, right? That's individual. And then there's the extrinsic, which is when we showed mum and dad, or when the teacher put our name up on the board, or whether our classmates and teammates slapped us on the back, the sensation, that emotion of the child who hits the first free throw, and his teammates wrap around him or on the ring and tap him on the back. And you can now see that emotion that you described before. I've never thought about looking for the physical manifestation of it. So external pride. So, one is about the pride, and then the other is the pride in something else. And that something else is the company, or the things the company does. So I've talked a lot. Why don't you give us and share some of your perspective, experience of where there's the overlap between the research and the application now into these sort of real world, individual teams, projects, companies?
Yeah, sure. So, I agree. I think this is a distinction very similar to the one I was making between personal pride and collective pride, or pride in your country. Just like you can feel pride in your country or your sports team, you can feel pride in your company. And I think that kind of pride is essential if the goal for a company is to have all of its employees invested in the company's success rather than just their own success. And I think, as you're sort of rightly pointing out, to have a successful company, you need both, right? If you have a group of people who care about their own success, as people intrinsically do, you don't typically have to do a lot to make people care about their own success, because, as you point out, this is something we've been caring about since childhood. We're social, it's innate in human nature to care about our own success. And then children get socialized by parents telling them you did great, right? Giving them the gold star. All that is a way of socializing children to think, okay, when I succeed, when I do something that my parents think is great, my teachers think is great, my society think is great, I feel this emotion that feels really good. That's authentic pride. And I want to feel that more, right? And so eventually the child starts to, do those great things, not for the gold star, not for the approval of others, but to get that feeling, right? It starts out coming from others externally, and then it builds inside, so that now most of us set out achieving, not so that we can get other people's approval, not saying that we don't want that. Of course, that feels great, but we do it for our own self. We work hard because we want to, at the end of the day, be able to look back on our identity and feel like, you know what, I'm someone I feel really good about. I'm someone doing something that seems important to me, that makes me feel like a good person. And there's all different kinds of ways to do that. And we notice when we're missing it. In my book, I tell the story of Dean Karnazes, who's the ultra marathon man. That's what he calls himself. And he has a book called that. And it's a great book. I highly recommend it. But he tells the story of how he was a runner in high school, then stopped running, as people do, went on to a successful career in business. And at age 30, he has his 30th birthday party and just realized he's feeling completely unfulfilled in his life. He is at a bar celebrating his birthday. He gets drunk. His wife leaves early. He starts flirting with an attractive stranger. And all of a sudden he realizes, what am I doing with my life? And kind of has this moment of waking up, essentially, where he realizes, I am not a happy person because I'm not living to my potential. I stopped doing the things that make me have an identity I feel proud of. That night he goes home, finds an old pair of tennis shoes in his garage, and just starts running, and ends up running 30 miles down the coast. He lives in California. And, it's just this amazing awakening where, of course, he can't walk for days after that. But in that night, he realizes, this is me. This is who I am. This is what I want to do and how I want to feel. And I think, I make that point because no one said to him, oh yeah, now I look up to you and think you're great now that you ran 30 miles. He got those accolades later when he started running races, but he did it for himself. He did it because he knew, I am not feeling this emotion in myself that I felt as a kid when I was running, that I felt as a kid when I was doing athletic pursuits. For him, that was the thing. And so that's what he was going for. And so I think that's really important, that the pride we feel, we were socialized to want to feel it by our parents' approval, but now it's something internal to us that we want to feel regardless of any other praise that we get from others. Now at the company level, there's another thing, right? Where it's sort of like, you can't have a company, or you can, but if you have a company where everyone is just out to see themselves succeed, I want to be the best coder I can be, I want to be the best worker I can be, you're not going to have people really caring about the company's success, because if they find a company where they can do better coding, or that gives them more opportunities, or, if their own coding is somehow pitted against the company's success, that could happen at some point for some reason, they're going to go for themselves, right? They're going to choose themselves over the company. What you really want is employees who also feel pride, like Vancouver people feel in the Canucks, in their company, right? Because then they're going to sort of tie those two things together. They're going to feel pride when they succeed, when they work really hard, but also when their peers succeed, right? When the team, when the group they've been working on has a major success, when the company has a major success and increases its earnings, that's going to feel not just like something out there that doesn't matter to me, or even something that matters only because it means maybe I'll get paid more, but something that matters because that is my identity. I feel good about my identity, my group collective identity being recognized in this way, being, achieving in this way. So, I work at the University of British Columbia. When we do really well in rankings of, the top universities in the world, or the country or whatever, I feel really good about that. Not because I think, maybe this means I'll get a pay raise. I may or may not. That's sort of independent of that. But because I identify with the University of British Columbia, and I feel a sense of pride in my identity, my collective group identity with the University of British Columbia. And as a result, I care enough so that I don't want to just do well for my own success, but I want to do well because that reflects well on the university and it makes the university look good.
Right. See, that's where I think is at least the magic dust of the role of external, whether we want to use the word recognition or feedback or acknowledgement from subordinates, peers, superiors, customers, of the contributions of the individual, and as you said, contextually in the team, builds and binds the team, because then they are feeling they're individually seen, and an individual can be a team or a project or a group, for the things that they're doing that are contributing to the greater whole, and that becomes a binder. And we could ask ourselves, in this recent period, which we've all seen and experienced either from individual companies' perspectives or we've read in the newspapers about the huge turnover that's happened. I would theorize that that is happening in some kind of group emotion, that the strength of the binding was diminished against the attractive pull of the external and the alternative. And that there is a question about whether there's a continuum of that, like, was that just a phase and it's sort of related to the pandemic, and the pandemic's gone and we'll all go back to it? I'm like, I would suggest to everybody that those major trends and shifts in the underlying sort of psychological / workplace structures were already in motion before and will be in motion post, and the pandemic flicked a lot of sort of dirt up, and how we're hybrid and we're remote and we've got good technology and we're used to all of this. And so it was a transformational moment, but we're not going backwards, right? And those things that were already there. So any, thoughts or comments on that question or that perspective of here's the role of pride, how to bring it to life inside companies, how we would teach managers on the call, like, one of the questions, thank you, Kelly Wilson, how do we talk about pride within a commercial performance construct?
I'm not a business leader, so it's hard for me to say, but one thing I will say is that I don't think it's something that can be taken for granted, right? I don't think it's fair to say, well, you work for this company, so of course you're going to feel pride in the company, right? That's not how it works. I think it has to be fostered and nurtured. It reminds me of my first job ever was at an ice cream shop. And I remember the boss, the manager telling us all, if you come here to buy ice cream, when you're not working, you're going to pay the same amount as a regular customer. And someone raised their hand and said, well, why would we then come here to buy ice cream? Why, what's the incentive for us? And he said, well, you should come here because you work, you should have this intrinsic pride in this ice cream shop. And of course, this is where you're going to shop from. And that's just not how it works. I think a lot of it has to do with feeling a connection and fostering that connection. And that can be done in a lot of different ways. I think it depends on the workforce and the clientele, but obviously, things like employees feeling like the company cares about them is going to be really important. Feeling like the company wants them to each do their best, that's really important, that the company is providing resources and team structure and whatever else is needed for each individual employee to perform at a level that allows them to feel individual pride. That should foster and sort of extend out into group level pride, I would think.
Would definitely agree.
Yeah.
Agree. So another question from Kim Crine. Thanks. How do you inspire pride across generations? Is it different?
Yeah. So I take it by across generations, it's sort of across age is probably what she means. I don't think it's different. I think that what kids feel is very similar to what adults feel and what, people of all ages feel. And I think pride is really important at every age. It starts very early. A lot of research suggests that when we tell our kids we're proud of them, that's obviously incredibly important because it's part of what starts to socialize them to care about performing well and working hard. And what the research suggests is that the important thing to tell kids is that their work is what you're proud of, that their effort they put in is what makes you proud, not just the performance. And so this is research by Carol Dweck. She's shown that basically there's a distinction between when kids are told, oh, that's beautiful work. You clearly put a lot of work in versus, oh, that's marvelous work. You're clearly really smart. Because when kids are given a second task that's similar, the kids who are told, oh, you worked really hard, they, given the opportunity, will say, great, I want to do another task, right? They sort of feel that pride motivation because, okay, I did something that made this person feel good about me. That makes me feel good about myself. So I want the opportunity to do it again. Whereas kids who are told, oh, you're really smart, that makes them feel, oh gosh, it's not what I did. It's just what they see in the outcome. What if I'm not really smart? I better not test it by trying again. And so it actually creates the opposite motivation of what you'd want to create, where kids avoid those performance situations the next time. And so it's this really interesting thing where, a lot of us as parents, I'm a parent, we have this intrinsic thing to say, oh, you're so smart. And what we don't realize is when we do that, it's sort of backfiring in a sense, right? It's sending kids the wrong message. And what we want to say is, oh, you worked really hard. That's really great. That's gonna, the harder you work, the better you're going to perform.
So I get a question often from some, let's call it uncertain versus skeptical HR leaders. Well, we're worried if we give, sort of too much, they use the word recognition, but I'll just say positive feedback. There may be a set of expectations, which I can't diminish the logic that could be a byproduct, because it's always the unintended consequences. But do you want to comment on, too much is so far away from anything that we do that dream that would be a problem, or any other commentary on, is there a negative byproduct of acknowledging people, encouraging them for, working hard and doing well or as best as they could?
Yeah, that's interesting. It's funny, I think, in grad school, there's this interesting thing that happens to people who go for a PhD, which is that they are typically very high achievers, right? You have to sort of do all the things well prior to the grad program to get into the grad program. So you're used to getting regular positive feedback for your work and your effort and your performance. Then you get to grad school, and the PhD programs, the way they work is there's not a lot of regular feedback. Tests are very rare. Papers, you're typically writing for yourself as well as, your mentors and your classes. And so all of a sudden you have these incredibly high achievement oriented people who crave positive feedback in a situation where they just don't have the opportunity to get it. And so they have to kind of make this switch and figure out, how can I feel good in my work and keep being motivated, even though I'm not getting the positive feedback as frequently as I would like. And it's a challenge. And I think some people never find that. And those are the people who don't make it, right? I think there is. So I guess this speaks to the question, because I think there is a level of internal motivation and internal pride that people who are going to be top employees need to feel if they're completely dependent on their supervisors giving them that positive feedback all the time. That's not going to be a particularly productive outcome, both because they're going to do it only for the supervisor, only for extrinsic rewards rather than intrinsic. And a lot of research suggests that people who work for extrinsic reasons, whether it's money or someone else looking up to you or telling you you're great, that leads to much worse outcomes in terms of performance compared to people who are intrinsically motivated, who do it for their own self. And so I do think that's a very fair concern. But the other thing is, we know when someone's lying, right? I mean, no one likes someone, no one respects a supervisor who's constantly saying, oh, that was great, when it wasn't, right? Or you hear, no matter what the person says, oh, that was a great work, great effort. It has to be real. It has to be based on something real. Otherwise it becomes meaningless. So, my answer would be, yeah, I get why you're concerned. I think that it's a balance. I think that the answer is not never give feedback or dole it out really sparingly. That's not good either, but give it out when it's reasonable. And I think the other thing is the negative feedback, right? That no one, supervisors who are really tough and negative and aggressive and domineering, that's not a good way to go either. And so I think there's, just because you don't want to praise every single thing the person does not mean that you want to criticize every single thing the person does. There have been leaders like that. We call them dominants. And they tend to get a lot of power. People typically do what they say, but the reason employees follow a dominant leader is not because they respect the leader or want to learn from them, but because they're afraid of them, right? Dominants tend to wield their power in this aggressive and controlling way and essentially coerce others to doing what they want, because they feel that, wow, if I don't do it, I'm going to get in trouble. My job might be on the line. They're going to humiliate me, all this sort of thing. And that's, an unpleasant dynamic for all the workers. And for the leader, it's not great, because the thing about dominant leaders is, because no one likes them or respects them, they only have power as long as they actually have control over something that other people want and can wield it in this manipulative way. If they ever lose power, they lose everything, because the employees have always wanted them out anyway, right? And they're going to take advantage of that.
Mm-hmm. I've got to watch how I handle myself too, and we can all feel ourselves when we've gone the wrong direction. So anyway, a great question. Actually, it's from Dr. Garlick. He's on the call. He's posted a question that I thought I'd pose in front of you, which was, if I get to the question, Dr. Garlick, at Gallup, we talked about the importance of having a strong ego drive, the willingness to claim your talent and know what you do well. They talk about the importance of pairing a strong achievement record, right, which is where you were going, strong achievement record, with the ego drive, so you don't become big hat, no cattle. So, that now in the context of all the HR leaders and your, recommendations is, how do they help refine that comment and, where you were going before, which is it can't be meaningless feedback and just recognition for nothing.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a great point, that there has to be a focus on actual achievement. And, I think the thing to do is, for people who aren't achieving, figure out what they need to help them achieve and orient the praise that way. Make sure that that's what they're motivated to feel pride in, is the hard work and effort and the output, right? The effort should pay off. Now, sometimes we put in a lot of effort and it doesn't work, and that isn't something that we should be ashamed of. That's sort of a lesson of, let's figure out what didn't work, what we need to do differently, how we can, shift that. But there's a way to say, hey, you worked really hard. You put the effort in, didn't happen this time. that needs to change. We're going to change it. And here's how. So you're both praising and allowing for pride and wow, you put the work in, but also acknowledging there needs to be some sort of shift in behavior for the future. And, I think this is where also the hubris difference comes in. Once people start focusing on others' praise and sort of become the person who's not necessarily achieving anything new, but kind of resting on the laurels of their old achievement and, bragging about it or getting attention from social media about it or anything like that, that becomes hubristic pride, right? And I think that's sort of this battle that we all have. We have a massive success. We feel really proud of it ourselves. And then others start to praise us for it. And that feels really good too, right? We're humans, we evolved to care what others think about us. It's sort of a critical part of getting status. So of course that feels great. But then what happens is we have a choice. Do we think about what led to the success and continue on that path? Okay, I worked really hard for the success, so I'm going to find another project that's similar and I'm going to work really hard for that success. Or do we think about the praise? Wow, that praise felt really good. How do I get more of that? Maybe if I make sure more people know about my success. What if I post about it on social media? What if I let others who don't know about it? What if I make sure to mention it in casual conversation? Okay, well, that's going to lead to greater praise, but it starts to become this sort of empty praise that I think Professor Gallup was referring to, right? That it's not based on actual achievements anymore. And it is exactly, when authentic pride becomes hubristic pride. And I mention this because I think it's a real temptation we all have, right? It's sort of like, you had a huge success. It feels so good to get others' praise. Why not put it on Facebook and make sure you can get even more people's success? And the problem with that is, yeah, you might boost in status because now more people know what a successful individual you are. You're also going to come off as arrogant, right? We all know people who talk about their successes too much or inappropriately or in the wrong context. And we might give them status because we think, okay, they're pretty impressive. We can't help but give them status. They deserve it. But we're also going to think, I don't really want to be their friend. I don't really like that guy, right? And so the ideal would be get the status, have the achievement, but don't lose social liking. Don't lose your social credibility. And there's a way to do that, right? It's a balance. But if you stay with authentic pride, don't go to hubristic pride. That's the likely outcome.
So see that interesting perspective that we all bring to this topic, right? Where you are coming from the individual self-generating a dimension of pride that may attract others too, versus the alternative, versus the external view, of course, that we take, which is how do you generate pride in others? For as we began the conversation, if we look back, over the hour together, we have this construct that says pride is so powerful, it's actually a studied emotion, right? And if you are trying to leverage, the sort of natural tendencies of human beings to do great work and good things inside the companies, I mean, that's the purpose of the companies and what they do, then you've got this huge opportunity, right, which is to inspire the right emotion to drive towards the right behaviors. And now the question of, well, how would you do that, given pride is clearly, an emotional sort of tool. And if you can get people's emotion connected, well, it's people's emotion that says, I don't like the people I work with. I don't like my boss. I'm going to go look around. Then they find that the place across the road pays 50 cents more. They're out the door. They didn't start with, they pay 50 cents more, an hour, as the case may be, or I want to do a locum, working nurse everywhere around the place. It's because they don't like where they're at. And how do we then sort of turn around that? How do you turn around that? Take, Dr. Tracy's sort of ideas and say, look at your people and your teams and say, how do I celebrate them in a manner that doesn't inspire too much hubris, but encourages them, celebrate some of their achievements and accomplishments, as Dr. Garlick had suggested in his comment. But even for those that may not be the best performers, ask yourself the question, could they be better performers? What are the tool sets they need? Now, what I find fascinating as a reminder to all of us, because we've all done this at various stages in our careers and tendencies, and a good thing, again, HR leadership on this call to do some coaching back, is we were programmed and grew up with the gold star mentality about everything was about that recognition and that approach and getting that positive praise. And something happens in our teenagehood years. It may be our parents got so sick of us that they started not being so encouraging and they started saying no more regularly. For those of us that are in that mode or can remember that mode of having, people there. But when we actually then get to the workplace, we immediately find the failings in all of our people, and the failings in the documents they generate, and the failings in the executions, and the failings to meet this. And the first thing we do is come down on them, which of course isn't very inspiring, and we all know that, and we keep falling into that trap. So this whole webinar and this purpose and this discussion, conversation, etc., is all a reminder about, hey, you got to go the other direction. Pride is hugely powerful. And while intrinsic pride for the sports person or for the professional or the code writer is, of course, the most important and the biggest source, but there's a lot of people who that's just not there. They are the unthanked heroes of the economic system for which we love, right? Which we get the luxuries of, is all as a result of the unthanked heroes who push the shopping carts, who clean the floors, who police in the middle of the night, who clean up the drug dealers and the mess and this and all of the other horrendously challenging things. Not that we're sitting behind the desk and it's really nice and go home at 5:30, the kids need us to leave. Don't worry, we're working hybrid, it's easy. So for all those people, which are the real world, right, of the economic systems, I'm like, we have a responsibility to try and help inspire pride, and they like to hear from their customers and their subordinates and their peers. And I love the story that, Dr. Tracy, about the team. See, the audience felt connected to the team. So public recognition of the small, great work of the security guards that kept the building running during the horrendous storms, from the CEO or from the leadership on the other side of the country in a different time zone, maybe different country, is incredibly valuable, and the source of pride that then all the other people might feel because they did a great job, because they feel connected to that team. So there's lots of real ways to bring this to life. You don't have to have tech, but given that every person in the world picks this up first thing in the morning and looks at it, and puts this down last thing at the night and looks at it 350 times a day, just ask yourself, don't you think a little company pride could exist within all of that world? Don't you think it's possible? Of course, we can help you with that if that's of interest. But anyway, wonderful time together. I hope it wasn't me doing too much talking. It's always dangerous if I get the microphone. But Dr. Tracy, thanks to all the audience. Thanks for being a part of it. If we didn't get to all of your questions, I've got a few we didn't get to. We will do a follow-up. We will send a copy of the webinar. There weren't slides, so you don't need to worry about that, but we will send instructions for where to get a copy of Dr. Tracy's book. We will send you her contact information if they wanted to have a separate call. Would that be okay?
Yeah, you can share my email for sure. I'd be happy to respond to emails from people.
Okay, great. So we'll do that. So you can expect to hear from us sort of probably beginning of next week. Thank you all. There'll be another webinar next month. And again, Dr. Tracy, thank you for giving us your time, and for everybody, wherever you are, thank you and all the best.